everyone, and welcome to NDIS Cuppa Questions. My name's Mel, and joining me today is our amazing founder and managing director of Plan Tracker, Elisa James. Welcome.
Hey Mel, I'm so looking forward to getting into all of today's topics. It's been a huge week in the NDIS world with much long-awaited release by the Minister of some updates and by the agency, especially around our famous question, or perhaps infamous, because we've received thousands of calls regarding iPads, tablets, you name it. So over to you and let's jump in.
Fantastic. All right, so just to get everyone started, while you are connecting, a little bit of housekeeping for today's session. If you've got any questions that you haven't asked us in advance, and firstly, thank you so much for everyone who did reach out in advance of today's session, but we will also be running a live Q&A, and we have Justine from the Plan Tracker team helping to moderate and answer some of your questions in the chat box. So you'll find that in the bottom bar of your webinar. If you're watching on a device such as a tablet or a phone, you should find a link to that. It is the chat feature, so we're using the chat over the Q&A. If you accidentally pop it in the wrong spot, we will find it for you. But what we'll be going through is some of the content that we've prepared in response to your questions today. So I'll be posing some questions to Elisa as we go through, but if you do have any that pop up and come to mind, feel free to pop them in the chat and we'll add them in as we go along, or we'll save some of them for the end as well. So Elisa, I'm just going to pop some slides up for us if you're ready. What are you looking forward to the most, I think, going through today?
Look, I think it's one of those spaces. There's so many details in all of the changes that have come through recently. And, you know, we take literally, as I said before, hundreds of phone calls around different issues, but it's just great to be able to clarify some of those things that both participants and providers might be unaware of, and just to try and make that a little bit easier for people so that ultimately with good information you can make great decisions.
Fantastic. I absolutely love that. And I know it's something that we really stand by. And I know you personally stand by that, but really having that information at your fingertips and knowing what's real and what's not is so valuable in making decisions. I just wanted to run through a few things that we're going to be covering off today, just in case anyone's got any questions and they're jumping in that chat box nice and early. And as I said, Justin will be in there helping me as we go along. Some of the topics we'll be covering during today's NDIS Cuppa Questions session will include some important changes that have come out recently, some as recent as yesterday and this morning from the NDIA, and what dates that you probably need to be noting down in the calendar if they do impact you. There's a big hot topic at the moment, which is assistive assistive technology for low-cost items. This one comes down to, as Elisa mentioned, our favourite and most asked question of, can I buy an iPad, a tablet, or a laptop? We'll be going through all of that with you and the changes that came out yesterday. So that was Monday, the 27th of April, 2020. We'll also be going through some of the changes and how you can access support coordination, looking at some plan flexibility, and also just recapping. I know if you joined us for our last session, we went over how to use and spend your funding during COVID-19 and in response to the current pandemic. We'll be going back through all of that information and answering some of the questions that are still coming about, just for clarity for everyone. And I think it's really good just to refresh on that. So we also have had in New South Wales and some other areas some LAC partner changes in the past week. So we'll be mentioning some of those as we go along. But Elisa, I think what we might do is jump straight into that hot topic. I know it's fresh on everyone's mind. So probably the biggest question we're getting is, can I claim an iPad or a tablet? And I'd love to hear from you what those changes have been.
Okay, so thanks, Mel. As we said last week, up until yesterday, the rules hadn't changed, but the circumstances had. Now, the rules have changed. So what was really important is that the agency had said they would bring out some new rules specifically for COVID-19 around low risk, low cost assistive technology, specifically around the purchasing of electronic devices. So we're talking iPads, laptops, other tablets, whatever that might look like for you. So the changes that they brought out, in order to understand those, it's helpful to understand what the previous situation was. So up until this device policy change, I guess probably a good way to call it, which became active yesterday, up until that point, if a participant had a consumables budget in core, then they were able to claim up to items that are consumable items. So we call it low risk, low cost technology, which is really nothing to do with technology as such. It's a broader term that means stuff you can buy that you're going to keep for a while. So it's not your consumables, it's not your incontinence type products, it's anything that's larger, tangible that you can hold on to. So examples would have been, maybe items for a chill out space, or maybe some low risk, shower stool, or different things like that. In this change is specifically around devices. So a lot of people to date would have had funding in their plan to purchase devices. So if you might have needed an iPad, for example, if you were non-verbal and you used that as your speech device using Prolo Quota Go or similar, you would have potentially had funding for an iPad in your budget. Mm-hmm. And the rules around that were $1,500 per item. Now, what's changed? So, first of all, it's still the case until the 9th of May that you have to have a consumables budget in order to purchase a device, an electronic device. What's happened now is that they've tightened up around the amount that you can spend and some of the regulations around it. So the key points are a device may only be purchased if it's for use because of disability and because of this COVID-19 social distancing situation. So in order to show that, there's the requirement of having a letter of support from a therapist, whether that's your OT, speechy, psychologist, or other non-allied health type therapist, whoever that might be. You need a letter of support stating why you need this device specifically for disability requirements. So in that, watch out, it's not to replace education. It's not to support, say, for example, a child wanting to do online learning. That would be considered an education requirement and should be funded by the education department or other. And same with health. It's not for telehealth, not for visits to the virtual doctor. It's specifically and exclusively for use as a disability device for where you cannot get to the therapist. And continuing therapy is, of course, as we all know, critically important. So with that, there's a new price limit. Basically, what the agency is saying is that the price limit now is $750. There's a single purchase limit. So they won't fund multiple devices. If you feel that you need an iPad and a laptop, one is what's currently under the new policy. There's a couple of exclusions as well. We've talked about a couple there, like is it something that should be funded by another department like education or health? A couple of the other exclusions are things like, do you already have a device at home or one that you could borrow that would be appropriate? So they're actually asking participants to very clearly state, no, this person or myself, we do not have access to a particular device. So it's not just an opportunity to upgrade. It's not just an opportunity to add to your collection. It's genuinely trying to target those who may not already have access to borrow a device for those therapy sessions.
Fantastic. And we've just had a question come through, which I'm going to pose to you now, Elisa, because this one's right on topic. So if I'm self-managing my funding, do I still need that letter of support from my therapy provider?
It certainly is what the policy is saying. The policy is very clear that this applies to everybody's budgets, whether they are being agency managed, plan managed, or self-managed. So, yeah, best advice right now is make sure you get yourself a letter from your therapist. And when we say letter, email is fine. There are a few requirements, electronic letter. There are a few requirements and things that the therapist needs to make sure they include in that piece of advice. And we've got a link to those, I think, Mel, so I won't run through those now just for the sake of time. But there's a very clear list of what the therapist needs to cover off. So make sure you grab a copy of that first. Yeah, ask your therapist to write you a letter.
We'll include that link with the replay that we send out tomorrow morning. So you'll get a copy of that. We'll just make sure you have all the resources that are mentioned here today. So if you're missing any in the chat box or you're wanting to know and learn more about them, we'll pop them in that on the page with the replay so that you can go through that information. So I think that'll be great. All right. So for clarity here, because I know we get this question a lot and I know you've been through it, but if I don't have consumables, in my budget, can I, as of right now today, can I use any of my other funding to access a device under this new policy?
Okay, so really good question. At the moment, if you have a consumables budget, but you haven't got any funding in it, you can go to the agency and ask them to move money from a different budget into your core or into your consumables. If you already have money in core is flexible, you can just move money into consumables. So that's pretty straightforward. But for some people who do not have a consumables budget, but have core, there's a couple of different things. There's one thing that will happen for them, and there's a different thing that will happen for people who have, say, especially for our early years families, where you just have your therapy budget or your improved daily living. And in those two cases, they're slightly different. On the 9th of May, the 9th of May is the magic date. On that date, apparently, automagically, the NDIA are going to put in some updates. So we're imagining that'll happen over that weekend, which means that if you do have core but not consumables, you will then have consumables and will be able to claim an iPad or electronic device, tablet, etc., from your new consumables budget. If you haven't got core at all, then and you have just got the therapy budget, then what we're expecting to see there, based on the NDIS communication from yesterday, is that they'll add a new line item, a special one-off line item that will be in there for the COVID season, so it's about 6 months or so, which will allow us to claim from your therapy budget.
Okay, fantastic. So if even just to recap there, even if I don't have core at all, we're going to see that extra line item added in under a capacity building budget. That's what we're
right.
expecting to see?
Exactly.
Fantastic.
They haven't been extremely clear, but we would expect that it'll come under the improved daily living, which is the therapy budget.
Lovely.
So,
all right.
But if you don't have that, it's likely don't know how that will work, but
we'll all wait and see together.
We'll wait and see.
That is the point of these sessions. We're going to go through all the relevant information for you.
Exactly.
So Elisa, is there something I can be doing now if I am a participant or a nominee, say on behalf of my child, and they don't have a core budget or they don't have consumables? Can I be preparing now for the May 9 date?
Yeah, you absolutely can. So depending again on how your plan is managed, either way, you're going to need to have an invoice to pay to purchase the item. So that's step one. So let me talk about the plan management approach, because obviously that's what we deal with every day. You would need to find yourself an invoice or be ready to purchase a device. Don't already pre-purchase, you won't be able to back claim. NDIS is really clear about that you can only pay for supports within the time frame of a particular plan or a particular rule. So if you come in with an invoice that's dated today and you're in that situation of not really being able to do that till 9th of May, we won't be able to pop that through. And that would be true for most plan managers, or all plan managers. So wait until the date, but do your research. Be ready to either have an invoice or where you're going to purchase and then be reimbursed from. With agency, that means you need to use a registered provider to sell you that device, of course. And for self-managed, again, as good flexibility like we have for plan management. So the other things to do, get your letter organised, get your emails sorted from your therapist. I imagine they're going to be pretty good at writing these after a little while. So again, you'll be able to send them the link that we've got there just to make that clear for them as to what's needed. And make sure if you are using a plan manager or you're going through an organisation that you've answered those additional questions that the agency's just asking you to confirm. Do you have a device already type questions.
Fantastic. All right, and I know Justine's answered this one in the Q&A section for Kira. Kira, thank you so much for asking this question. I think we just want to go through this for everyone so that everyone's abreast of this. So when, I'm just going to use the second half of your question, Kira, when making a purchase of a device, so if I've already got a letter from my therapist of support, when making that purchase, do I specifically need to purchase from a particular provider, or does that depend on my funding and how it's managed?
Yeah, great question. So as we know, if your plan is agency managed, then you are limited to choosing agency registered or NDIA registered providers. And there are a few big players in that space. I believe Harvey Norman and JB Hi-Fi are both registered. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that one. With plan management and self-management, then any business, as long as they have an ABN and can raise a tax invoice or a tax receipt, then that should suffice.
Fantastic, no worries. Okay, and just to build on that one just a little bit more for you, obviously you just mentioned JB and Harvey Norman. Are there any other providers? So I believe, and this might be wrong for my understanding, I think JB will invoice in advance of. So for participants who can't afford to prepay and to purchase it and then be reimbursed, are there any other businesses that you can recommend that do that kind of invoice up front for a participant?
Look, I think there is a business called Mac Doctor or similar who do online purchasing. We've seen quite a few invoices over the time come in from them, and I'm pretty sure they. I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure it's Mac Doctor, something like that. Mel, often people talk about Afterpay too, so this might be a good chance to cover that off. For those who may not be familiar, Afterpay is where you make kind of like a down payment, if you like, and you pay off an item over time. That's probably the least preferred option for you when you're purchasing something. And most of the time, we find that you can find a product from somebody who will give you an invoice. So if you're struggling you're wanting to buy something online that meets the requirements of your plan and that you're going to claim, then obviously with NDIS, we're unable to pre-claim, so you can't claim ahead of time and then make that payment. But most businesses are prepared to raise an invoice. It might not be obvious on their website, but feel free to look around, find their contact details, find their email, and just contact them and ask them. You'll find that in the majority of cases, companies are quite happy to do that.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree with you more there. The one saying I always live by is if you don't ask, the answer's already no. So it doesn't hurt to reach out and to ask someone. The most they're going to say is no, we don't offer that, but most of the time they are flexible. So I think that's really fantastic. All right, I think we might jump across into the provider focus of this topic at the moment. So let me just move slide along for you.
As you're doing that, Mel, can I just jump? I saw a question come through from Kylie Grimley.
Go for it.
Kylie, you were asking about, is a post-school options course considered educational? So what the NDIS is saying here is that it's about NDIS funded supports. So they are going to be, if you need a device, and again, you meet the criteria that we've talked about, that it's for provision so that you can continue to access your NDIA funded supports. So in that case, if the support that's being accessed through that post-school options course is NDIA funded, then that would meet the criteria. So you might not be getting a letter from a therapist, it might come from that provider who's stating, again, all those requirements that are in what providers need to state in their why you need this device letter.
They definitely do. All right, and I just want to reach out and say thank you to everyone who's popping up suggestions. I know we've had some say that the good guys are registered. I know that not all of these providers are registered in every state, so it is always good to check for your local area. Dean, you mentioned, obviously, I think it's JB and Harvey Norman are not registered in WA as yet, so we're sorry about that. I'm sure they will eventually. They are a national company. So what we might do next is we're going to jump into the provider focus of this. So for therapists such as OTs and speech pathologists or speech therapists, providing written confirmation, what do they need to include in that, Elisa?
Mel, that is a great question, and you're going to have to find the page that has a list because I actually can't remember off the top of my head. That's the one I think we're going to pop the link into. Okay. But it's, let me have a quick look. Have we got it nicely and easily here for me? Here we go. Found. Thank you. All right. Participant's name and NDIS number. Pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Confirmation that the delivery of current supports in the participant's plan has been significantly hindered due to the physical distancing restrictions or any other consequences of COVID-19, and that alternate solutions to maintain delivery and outcome have been considered but do not fully address the limitations. Okay. So in other words, you have to relate it back to the COVID-19 season and why it's not possible for this support to be delivered in the traditional way that you were delivering. How the device is necessary to maintain supports and services while maintaining physical distancing requirements. So what the NDIS are looking for is, why can't you just send an email to mum and dad with, here's some exercises you could do at home? Why can't you just provide some other information that would provide that same level of support? Now, we know with therapy, it's, it's one thing to try and read it off a page. It's entirely different to have it delivered by a human being. So just make sure that you emphasize why, whilst some of those other supporting factors might be helpful, they're not going to replace the core therapy that's being delivered. The specific technologies and associated accessories required, and that these represent the lowest specification capable of delivering the benefit. So in other words, the NDIS doesn't want to fund top of the range laptop or a iPad Pro. They don't want to fund a whole range of different accessories that go with the device. They've actually very clearly, and at times clarity can be annoying, but actually in this case it does make it easy to follow. So what they've said is lowest spec, no more than 750, no additional accessories except for a standard case which you can purchase, or, and this is important for behaviour support therapists, if the person requires a rugged case, you need to point that out clearly, that it's a rugged case, because obviously that's usually 3 times the price, and those will go through. If there are other accessories that are needed that are very clearly related to disability, then they can also be purchased, but you need to point them out. So the example they use in the documentation is around for people with poor motor skills and poor grip and say wheelchair bound, they may need a mounting device for that. That would be completely appropriate to claim from funding. Somebody deciding that they'd just like an Apple Pencil for the fun of it, maybe not so much if it's not needed for therapy. And then the final point is that participant is able to use the device to access support. So in other words, is this going to actually work for that person? We came across a situation a couple of weeks ago where somebody said, look, I have a computer at home which I can use, but actually we need a touch screen. For a child, they're not able to use the keyboard, they're not understanding, but the therapist has activities that they want to do with them, but they're going to need a touch screen. And so that's a great example of using some existing equipment from home and adding to it, still within those boundaries. I mean, this is a couple of weeks ago, but still in those same would have fit current criteria.
Fantastic. Okay. Now, I know we've mentioned the $750 kind of limit that the NDIA has advised, and you can find that information on their website. Also going to point out that information for therapy providers of what to include in your letter, Justine's been very kind and popped it in the chat box for everyone, so that list is up there already. We will include it with the replay for you as well. Now, we've had a question come through from Kim, and Kim has asked, can you use the $750 as part of the payment towards a device?
Look, we would say it will depend on how your plan is managed, and if you're plan managing, who your plan manager is. We at Plan Tracker, we take the approach that following the NDIS's lead on, say, home modifications, under the home mods area, if somebody is receiving a home modification, the NDIS is going to fund the lowest level of what's acceptable for that home mod. They're not going to give you the bells and whistles, the nice brassy gold one, right? But if you would like the higher quality or the slightly different aesthetic look, and it's going to be higher in price, they will fund the base price and you can pay the difference. So using that approach, certainly for us at Plan Tracker, we take the approach of, in this case, you would be able to claim up to your $750 and then you would pay the difference. But again, the device has to be acceptable. It has to meet all those other requirements that are talked about. So just make sure if you are going to do that, it's probably worth covering off with your therapy letter or your supporting evidence that whatever device you're then going to purchase that may be of higher quality meets that requirement.
Fantastic. All right, and we've got one more question on this before we move on. I know we've got a lot more topics to cover. Is there any exceptions to this rule if a store is, or a whole bunch of stores perhaps, are sold out of low-cost laptops or tablets? Because some of them, and Leanne, this is your question, so, and thank you for asking this. You've mentioned that some of the providers and stores have sold out and they won't be back in stock till May or June.
Mm.
Is there any exceptions to the rule at the moment?
There hasn't been anything clear in the policy that was brought out yesterday to say yes, there are. It would be there'd be a couple of things. So the first would be, have you looked at all of the online alternatives? Given that most people are not visiting a store to purchase, you don't necessarily need to purchase locally, and shipping may be an option. So have you really done a good search? And look, we know the reality is they are as rare as hen's teeth. It's like trying to buy a webcam right now, you know, it's still crazy. So do your research and look around, see if you can find it elsewhere. There is one line in the policy that says if your requirements are higher than the rates and the information being presented in the policy, that you can provide additional evidence for support of why that should be, you require a higher level. I'm not sure that NDIA would just say, well, because it wasn't available at my local store is an okay answer. And at this point, we haven't had to face that, but as we do, we'll probably need to just make sure, ultimately what we don't want is people out of pocket. So making sure that you can cover and claim properly according to the guidelines is the best approach.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for answering that. What I think we might jump onto next for everyone, we are conscious of your time, and if you do have more questions about the assistive tech changes, please reach out to us. You'll find us on social media. You can just search for Plan Tracker, and you're welcome to join our Facebook group as well. It's very friendly and inviting community, just while I get this slide to change for us. The next one we've been getting a lot of questions about, and I know we touched on this last session, support coordination and how I can get access. So we have had so many questions on this front. We've got more coming in. I've parked a few from the chat box, so thank you for everyone who's asking. But what are the changes? I know that they came out on the 25th of March. What happened? What changed on the 25th of March? Just for everyone to recap.
Okay, so for those of who just might not be aware, support coordination is generally funded as its own budget under your NDIS plan. And it's usually given as a set number of hours with the obviously standard rate per hour, which means if you don't have a support coordination budget, you're not able to access the fabulous support that support coordinators can bring. And they do a whole range of things, helping you figure out what supports you need, helping you find those supports, helping you learn how to be able to put those things in place for yourself moving forward. In this COVID-19 time, many people are struggling to find supports, and some services are not able to operate well or to provide the service that they did before. And so the NDIA wanted to overcome some of that and to put some kind of, I'm going to use the word safety nets, I guess, put some additional support in place so that if you are a person with an NDIS plan and you have core budget, there are now, as of 25th of March, there are 3 new line items, which are our 3 line items for support coordination. This means any participant with a core budget can now choose to purchase support coordination. Again, depending on how your plan is managed. If your plan's agency managed, you would need, that budget's agency managed, you'd need to use an NDIA registered provider. Plan or self-managed, you can just go ahead and purchase those services and have them paid through the various mechanisms. So basically what this means is for support coordinators, you're now able to assist people who may have run out of support coordination budget and need some more assistance, or also work with participants who may never have used a support coordinator before. There's no limit on the number of hours that you can charge, but obviously that's by negotiation with the person and their budget. So their core budget is available for use, but obviously you're there to help them use their core budget. So the other key thing that's really important for support coordinators to be aware of is that the same reporting standards are still in place. So when you're providing that service, reporting back to the agency will still be required.
Fantastic. All right. And I think you've just actually answered the next question for us, which we get a lot, which is if I've run out of my support coordination budget, can I continue to use my support coordinator by using some of my core funding?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Big
All
yes.
right. Lovely. Love a big yes. It's always nice to have that confidence and to choose confidently. The next one that we have is, will I always be able to use my core funding for a support coordinator? Or as you mentioned earlier, is this just part of the COVID-19 interim?
So there are a lot of these COVID-19 changes. And what the agency is telling us is that most of them will be reviewed within the 6-month timeframe, which I think takes us to around about September, thereabouts. So, excuse me one sec. It's all right, I don't have COVID. So basically, there will be a review of all of these COVID changes, and they're being clearly identified as COVID-19 changes. So most of them are interim policy. However, what we do know is that there's always been a desire for making budgets and plans more flexible. And part of the challenge of that has been around having 15 different budgets, where for a lot of people, you'll have funding in one budget that you're just not using. Your needs have changed or it's not been quite the right fit. And really, you need funding over in a different budget. So right now under COVID, the agency is making that easier to move funding around. A couple of mechanics to do with that, and you have to contact them to get them to do the move. But we've known that there's this concept called fungibility, which the minister actually announced, I think back in December last year, or maybe January, to say that that would be coming into play sometime around the middle of this year. Whether the back end systems are quite ready or not, they certainly weren't a little while ago. And they're obviously not quite ready now, otherwise we'd see a little more flexibility at this point. But we're hoping that that flexibility comes through in the near future. So we may see that there is a lot more flexibility across our funding budgets. And that same core flexibility that we've got, that we'll be able to take advantage of that across capacity building budgets as well.
Fantastic. All right. Now, our next question is from Dean. And Dean, I know you're a support coordinator. So thank you for this question. And Dean's question is, do we need a new service agreement as a support coordinator if we're switching to start claiming support coordination out of a core budget where we previously were using a support coordination budget?
So Dean, that's a really great question. So first of all, service agreements are good practice, but they are not an absolute requirement. But they are definitely a recommended good practice. And certainly if the participant you're working with has agency managed funding, then you strongly recommend that you do a new service agreement or an addendum to say that the schedule of supports has changed, just so that you're all covered and everybody's clear. With plan management and self-management, that's entirely up to accommodation. So for plan managers, it's up to the plan manager if they insist upon service agreements. I know we at Plan Tracker don't. We say they're good practice and they're a decision between the participant and the provider as to whether they want to have that in place or not. So it really will depend on the person and on how the funding is managed. But generally, the most important thing around all of this is communication. So communicate with your participant, acknowledge upfront how much it's going to be, especially around support coordination. A lot of participants don't understand the incredible amount of work that you guys do behind the scenes. And so they can quite often be surprised by invoices that are larger than they thought, because they're like, oh, I only saw them for an hour. Yes, but they probably had to do 3 or 4 hours work to then present for you the next time and to prepare some of that background work. So again, communication is the key.
Fantastic. All right. And I'm actually going to jump off the back of that question. Denise, this was your question earlier, and thank you for waiting. So Denise has asked, can I have a meeting with a support coordinator to look over my son's plan and his funding and to help advise me on what I need to look at, but not actually use them to coordinate? So I think this one's going to come back to that communication piece.
Yeah, look, Denise, I think it really depends on, everybody has a different level of support that they're wanting, and support coordinators have a fabulous broad knowledge of the different types of supports that are out there. A lot of them are very well experienced and have seen a lot of different things that different people have done. So they can be a great resource to bounce ideas off, to come up with some innovative thoughts, to really just spend some time generating ideas. If you don't need them to then make the phone calls and coordinate appointments, that's fine. Just let them know. So yeah, most support coordinators, look, it depends again on the support coordinator. Sometimes you'll find there's a minimum amount of time that they want to make available, especially since there's that reporting requirement back to the agency. So it's not always possible to find that not all support coordinators will be happy just to check in and do a couple of hours. You may find there's an additional requirement there, but look, communicate, ask them. So
yeah, never hurts to have that conversation.
That's right.
We're all for communication here. So what we're going to jump onto next, and I think this is going to be really valuable for everyone because we're still getting these questions. For anyone who didn't see our last session of NDIS Cuppa questions or who would love a recap, we're going to go through using your NDIS funding during COVID-19. I know we're getting these questions a lot. So Elisa, just to refresh us, what should I be referring to if I'm looking at a new support or service or getting extra sessions? Is there any kind of guiding principles or NDIS resources that are going to guide those decisions at this point in time?
Yeah, good question, Mel. So the first thing I would say is there's no reason, like we said it before, but the rules as such, other than some of the current COVID changes over the top, the general rules and the general practices of how you use your NDIS funding haven't changed. So at the core, your funding is there to help you build that bridge between disability and an ordinary life. So you're looking for what are those things, what are those gaps that I'm trying to fill? What are those gaps that without disability would not be an issue? So thinking through that type of area is really important. And friends and family can perhaps help you around that space as well a little. When we look at using your funding, one of the things you might have seen that's changed recently is this COVID-19 loading. And with the COVID-19 loading, what happened on the 25th of March was that the NDIA acknowledged that it's become much harder for providers to offer service during this time. And what we want our providers to survive, right? As a nation and as people who rely on providers, we need them to survive. We need them to do well and come out the other side, either providing support all the way through or if they're not able to be able to restart on the other side of COVID. And so the NDIA has put in place COVID-19 loading, which is basically the opportunity after discussion with participants, with you, to increase their charge and their price by 10%. Now, the NDIS hasn't at the same time then bumped up your plan. So we get lots of questions around, well, if there's more, if I'm having to pay more, does that mean I'm going to run out of funding more quickly? So how will that work? So around that, the NDIA hasn't automatically added 10% to your plan. And there's probably a couple of logistical reasons as to why that hasn't happened. Generally, what we see is that once a year, the agency will do on July 1 a CPI increase. And to be honest, it's great for participants to have that increase. For plan managers and agency managed plans and anywhere there's a service booking already in place on the portal, it's quite painful. Like there's just no other words for it. From an admin point of view, it's really painful, which is why they haven't rushed to top everybody's plan up now. We're suspicious and we'll have to wait till July 1 to find out, but we think it's most likely that there'll be a higher than CPI bump for plans on July 1. We might be wrong. We'll have to wait and see. Either way, though, the advice from the agency is if you find that because of the loading or because the cost of, or you need more services because of this COVID-19 time, that you can go back to the agency. And it seems to be actually far more easy to do at the moment than it has been in the past. You can go back to the agency and request an early review. So don't leave it till your funding is nearly exhausted. Have a bit of a plan. What am I expecting my costs to be over the next few months? If you think that you're going to run out, go back early and get that process kicked off.
Can I add a question in there? Because I've seen
Sure.
this one a lot in the past 24 hours, especially since this policy came out with regards to the assistive technology. Can I ask the agency for an early review to add a budget to pay for a device?
Oh, we so wish the answer was yes. But unfortunately, this is one space they have been very clear on, and they have very clearly said, no, they will not accept a review simply on the basis of wanting a device. Don't love that policy, but
All right, it is
there
what
it is.
for now.
It is what it is.
There it is. Thank you very much for clarifying that for us all, because as I said, I have seen that in so many different ways asked the same question. So I just wanted to clarify for everyone. And for the question, I know you mentioned this as well, Elisa, just while you're having a sip of your coffee there.
I know I've changed mugs.
Again,
did you notice?
I did indeed. Looks good. Nice to have something there.
Back up.
So for anyone, if you are self-managed, plan managed, agency managed, if you're logging into your portal looking for that extra 10%, it isn't there. I know we've had a lot of those questions saying I've looked everywhere in my MyGov portal and I cannot find it. Unfortunately, at this stage, there hasn't been a 10% increase to funding in participants' plan. The 10% loading is applied to certain services for certain providers who can charge that on top of their usual additional fee during this time. But as Elisa kindly mentioned there, we are expecting, hopefully, and fingers crossed on this one, that there's a slightly larger, although we'll all wait and see, the normal CPI increase on July 1st. So we'll all be hanging out to see what happens there, and we will, of course, keep you updated. Now, Elisa, we've had this other question here, and I think this one flows on from what we're talking about as well. With regards to plan extensions, so there is automatic plan extensions for core and capacity building budgets. It doesn't include capital supports. Will we likely, I'm going to say at the moment, see a COVID loading added to those plan extensions at this stage? Or will it only be to a new plan review?
Look, to be honest, we're not seeing it as yet. It seems to be that it's basically just a doubling of your plan. Is what we're seeing coming through with a small increase. So at this point, no. I think part of the rationale is that there's a number out there that says that plans are usually underspent by about plans are only utilised up to about somewhere in the 60 to 70% range. So there's that assumption that there's already some spare funding around, rightly or wrongly. I'd say probably wrongly in a few situations I know about. So yeah, no, at this point we're not seeing that. So if you are concerned about your amount of funding, it might be better to approach your LAC, approach your early years partner ahead of time so that you don't just hit that automatic rollover.
Fantastic. And for anyone who is going ahead with that automatic rollover, so if your plan's about to roll over or it might have already done so, plan dates. Am I getting a new set of plan dates or am I just getting an extra 12 months on my end date added?
Yeah, extra 12 months and possibly even an extra 2 years, Mel. So fantastic. We've seen a few of those roll through. Then. That's right.
Lovely. That's great to see. All right. Next hot questions that we've had, and we're going through all of these. I know we did talk about them last time, but we just want to recap because we continue to have the same questions. Cancellations. How much notice do I have to give as a participant to my provider?
So previously, it was a lot shorter. But again, in the interests of supporting businesses through COVID-19, the NDIA has said that if you as a participant cancel, then the provider can, and up to 10 working days prior to your appointment, then the provider has a right to claim 100% for that cancellation. So
that's up on last time then. It used to be 90% cancellation fee. So now you're telling us it's 100% cancellation fee?
That's right. March 25, new price guide, bumped that price up to 100%. And extended the time from 48 hours out to 10 working days. Okay. So if the provider cancels, of course, then that's different and there's no charge against your plan. But it's if you need to cancel for whatever reason, illness or not working for you, then they have that right or that ability to charge. Again, communication is key here. But look, we would really encourage participants to support providers and to really come through on those cancellation fees, because they make a huge difference for keeping businesses running at this point.
Fantastic. And I love that you jump ahead and get my next 2 or 3 questions every time you
Oh,
answer.
sorry about that.
That's all good. Fantastic. Okay, so we've answered there, can my provider charge a cancellation fee if it's within that 10 working day notice period? And yes, they can. And it is 100% of the service fee during COVID-19. That is the new kind of rules that have come out. The next question we have is around budget flexibility. So I know we get this one a lot. Can I use my core budget for therapies if I've run out of therapy funding in my capacity building budgets?
That's a really interesting question. So, as many people will be aware, there were a number of therapy line items put into core late last year, specifically for the purpose of health supports, disability-related health supports. Now, again, speaking from a plan management point of view right now, what that means is that generally we see people will use their therapy budget first, their improved daily living, and then if they're needing more therapy, then tend to claim that out of core. And look, is it right? Is it a health disability support? Often it's very hard for plan managers to know based on the invoice that's sent in. It just says OT. So at the moment, that seems to continue a little bit. Of course, the other option there too is, with the current flexibility around having the agency help you move funding. If you're more comfortable, you could move some funding from core back into therapy, or vice versa, as well. So you've got that. That's probably the better way to go. If you're wanting to use other supports, and let's say you have excessive amount of therapy budget left, and you're needing more core supports at the moment, then it would make sense to contact the agency and have them move that funding across for you.
Fantastic. All right. And I'm going to jump back to the cancellations for a hot second. Denise has a question. Does the new policy about cancellations apply if I, as a participant, reschedule a service? So Denise, correct me if I'm wrong here in the chat box. If I've rescheduled my support worker, for instance, within that 10 working day period, can my provider still charge me?
Again, communication with your provider is absolutely key. So look, generally I would expect most providers would be, certainly if there's enough notice given and you can reschedule, that would make sense. What you're looking for, that cancellation fee, really is to cover those situations where the business has to pay the worker. The worker is already being paid and suddenly there's a loss of income. And it's that loss of income that's trying to be covered. So if by negotiation, and it's not last minute, and again it would depend on the business, it would be a business decision for that provider, then you may be able to reschedule without any penalty. You'd need to talk to them about that. But if you're thinking about it from the business point of view, if you've got workers being paid, you've put them on roster because you had bookings, and then suddenly people are rescheduling and or cancelling, that makes it really hard to run a business through a pretty tricky time. So again, the heart of it is we want our businesses to survive.
Yeah, and look, to the attendee who's popped this in the Q&A anonymously, look, we would definitely agree with you there. Some participants and families we have seen in the online space, they're looking at consistently just rescheduling appointments instead of cancelling to try and avoid these fees. It's really not supporting the business that supports you in your everyday life. And we're all about communication there. So if you are having a reason to reschedule and it's genuine, then you need to go ahead and do that, if it's for health reasons or whatever it might be. But wherever possible, giving them the adequate notice that are in line with the NDIA guidelines of that 10 working days wherever possible, so that they can then support their team and their staff who are supporting you in turn. So that would definitely be ongoing. And thank you to whomever added that in the chat box there.
Yeah, and look, disappointing to hear that. As a community, I think these are unprecedented times. I know we've heard that before, but they are times we need to think about our community, not just about our individual situation. We certainly would always encourage participants to think about what the impact is of their actions on businesses and on their providers. We want everybody to come through the other side well. That's very much the heart of it.
Yeah, and look, I know that's a priority for us, for the community, as well as for our own team. And that's why we do these sessions, to help everyone just to get abreast of what the changes are and helping to support each other. We're all in this together, quite literally. We're all adapting to these changes. Now, Nadia has a question regarding the planned flexibility of budgets. So do I need supporting letters to move my budgets around? So if I wanted to, say, have a chat about moving some capital and core in between each other, do I need a support letter, a letter of support?
So first of all, we haven't seen flexibility around moving capital budgets. Capital is the big items, so your big home mods budgets and your assistive technology budget. Again, generally items over 1,500 and larger scale items. We certainly haven't seen any flexibility around that, and it hasn't been talked about. But between capacity building, so your therapy, your health and well-being, those types of budgets, finding and keeping a job, and into core and from core, that's where we're talking. No letters needed, but you do need to be ready with a reason why you want to move your funding. And generally, if you're wanting to move it, you'd have a reason. So call the agency, have a chat. It seems to be a pretty straightforward process at the moment. We're not hearing of people getting knocked back on that.
Fantastic. All right. Next, I'd love to have a chat about prepayments and reimbursements. So we had a little bit of a curly question come through. Can I prepay a provider for services to continue supporting them? So I'll just give an example. If I've got a support worker and they're not providing support right now, but I want to continue paying them so that they can come back into my home post COVID-19, can I actually do that right now?
Yeah, that's a really curly question.
It is.
It is a really curly question. And look, I think it's one of those that I'm going to defer to. Each person needs to make their own decision. I certainly know of friends within the sector who are choosing to do that. They're choosing to pay for services that aren't being delivered because the support worker isn't able to attend the home or whatever that is. Does it technically meet NDIA guidelines? Probably not, because the guidelines are that you can only claim for services that have been delivered. There are other mechanisms out in society that are there to protect those workers who are no longer able to work, such as JobKeeper and other mechanisms like that. So look, I think I'm not going to make a statement one way or the other, except to say that I think that you need to make your own decision on what you're doing there. But technically, it probably doesn't meet it. Technically, it doesn't meet NDIA guidelines. Is it the right thing to do? That's your call.
Fantastic. All right. Our next one is regarding reimbursements, and you mentioned earlier Afterpay. So we've had this one a few times. If I purchase an item through Afterpay, and for anyone who doesn't know, Afterpay is a service. It's kind of like an instant cash loan, if you like, where they'll pay up front for it and you pay in installments to repay to the total cost of what you purchased. So if I purchase an item through Afterpay, can I use the invoice or receipt to get reimbursed even before I've totally repaid all of my repayments to Afterpay?
Look, it's a good question, and we do get this one a fair bit. It really only relates to plan managed budgets, because obviously Afterpay is not an issue for NDIS managed funding, and possibly not an issue for self-managed funding. Regarding plan management, you would need to check with your plan manager. I know we certainly will only reimburse based on a receipt to show that payment has been made. So we wouldn't be reimbursing on payments that haven't actually been made yet.
Fantastic. Alrighty. Now the next one comes down to, I think we get this question a lot, and I see it a lot online as well for anyone who's on Facebook in all of those lovely NDIS communities. There's been a lot of, obviously, items, if you like, that have been purchased for sensory needs. Is there actually a list of approved items for children or individuals who have been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder that is available for us to look at anywhere? Is it on the NDIS website? Does it exist?
So the simple and the great answer is that it doesn't exist. And it's a tricky one, because when you first kind of start on this journey and start looking at how do I use my funding. It would seem to be that it would be really helpful if there was a shopping list. Can I? Can't I? But actually the power of the NDIS is that it is individualized. It's individualized planning, it's individualized choice and control. And so what that means is what might be a disability support for one person may not be a disability support for another person. And each person's situation is unique. So the minute we start to have a list, we start to have a you can, you can't. And it becomes really restrictive and takes away innovation. So for that reason, I'm really grateful that there isn't a shopping list as such. Now, what we would say to people who ask us this question is the best source of ideas and information about what might be helpful in your situation is, other than obviously your own ideas, of course, is to talk to your therapists. Talk to the people that know you or know your child, the people that have great experience in this space, and they will often have a really good idea of what might work for yourself or for your person.
Fantastic. I love that. And I think I totally agree with you there. It's whilst, yes, we all go looking for that list initially, I think it's great to have that creativity and innovation opportunity to say, actually, there isn't a list right here, but what works for my needs or my child's needs or whoever it might be that I'm supporting in this case. So definitely referring back to your team, whether that's your therapist, family members, friends, whoever knows you best, they're the ones to go and have those. It comes back to communication again, Elisa. We're back on communication.
It does, Mel. And it's really why you should think not just twice, but 3 times before you post on Facebook or any other social media platform. Can I buy XYZ? Because you're going to get a list of people who say, yes, absolutely, no, you can't do that. And in fact, nobody knows your situation. They don't know your plan. They don't know your plan goals. So really, best option always when you think, what can I spend my funding on? Head back to that guide, the Participant Guide 3, Participant Booklet 3, that's on the NDIS website. Page 9, it's got 7 questions that ask you to go, that the NDIS asks you to consider about what can I spend my funding on. And that is by far the best guiding source we have at the moment for helping you to make your own decisions. Just on that, if you, one of the things that's really key is recording your idea. So if you, especially if you're going to do something you want to purchase something that's slightly left field, it's great to capture your thought process at the time. Now you can do that just straight on paper or electronically or however you like. We've built a tool. It's free. It's on our website. It's called the My Supports My Choice tool. And you can go through and it just asks you those 7 questions and just records your idea. At the end, you simply pop your name and your email address in. It's going to send you an email. You've got that then as a set in time, dated. I went through the NDIS questions and answered them. Should you ever need it for audit down the track, it's a very clear way to say, hey, NDIS, I did what you told me to do, and I considered based on the information that other questions that you'd asked me to consider.
Fantastic. And I've just popped a link up in the chat box for anyone who is looking for that immediately. Other than that, we'll include it on the replay page for you as we did with our last session. So you'll have links to everything as we mentioned. Elisa, last question on our recap here before we move on to looking a bit more at how I can get more flexibility. Will my funding be cut if I don't use it all? We're getting this question a lot. I know that there was a chat on I think it was Every Australian Matters. There was a video that we've posted up. I'll go and quickly check that just to confirm in a moment. But
oh, you're chopping out a bit there, Mel.
Oh, can you hear me now?
We can.
Fantastic.
And we're just approaching 4, so I'm aware that we don't want to use up everybody's time as well. Look, the advice from the agency has always been that, it's not a spend it or lose it situation. However, I think from a personal point of view, I think it's really important if you are going into review and you haven't spent your funding, that you're able to talk about why that's the case. And, there's going to be a variety of reasons and they'll be different for each person. But often finding a therapist can be really hard. No offense, therapists, but sometimes finding you guys is tricky. It might take you a few months to get started. You might want to receive weekly therapy and there's only fortnightly available. for example, and therefore you can get a bit of an underspend. Same thing with support workers. So I think as long as when you, or perhaps you've been sick, and so therefore you haven't been able to use or access, or use your funding through that time because you've been concentrating on getting well. So I think the most important thing is when you do go for review is to have an understanding of what's happened for you in this plan, if you've underspent, why that's happened, and knowing what you need for the next plan and for support ongoing is more important than trying to simply just spend it for the sake of spending it.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's always going to come back to that communication piece. If there are circumstances that have impacted your ability to spend your funding during this time, then that's a communication piece to have with your LAC when you go for review, and to have with your providers as well, just to have those discussions. So, Elisa, we might move on. I've just popped a slide up that's been up for a minute or so now. This is our COVID-19 and NDIS updates resources. So just to recap for everyone super quickly, please use trusted resources. There is a lot of noise online right now, and there are a lot of, I'm not slamming the news agency kind of broadcasters, but there is a lot of fake news going around and things that are being recycled and upcycled nightly, if not hourly, at the best of times. So if you're looking for credible information with regard to COVID-19, referencing the national or your local state health and government resources is the best place to go. For NDIS, obviously ndis.gov.au/coronavirus, that will give you the coronavirus updates. They've got lots of fantastic animation videos. They've got Auslan variations and lots of information. That's where we're always reading. We read that daily, if not by the hour ourselves. So always going through that. And there is also resources on dss.gov.au. Those links will be here. We'll include them with the replay for everyone. Just going to pop
and just on that, Mel, actually that new disability helpline that's been extended during the coronavirus, which is available on that DSS link, and we'll pop in the other notes. That's run by IDEAS, who were already and are already funded nationwide to provide disability support and information. They are a great service. You don't have to have the person with disability yourself, or you can be, so you can ring on behalf of another person if you want to, or you can ring for yourself. They will go ahead and find for you the different resources you need in a certain space. They'll call around, make sure there's capacity, and then give you 3 or 4 choices, and help you make your choice if you're struggling to do that as well. So they're actually a really good resource. It doesn't cost you anything. It's free. So we've had some customers have lots of great success tapping into those guys.
Fantastic. Alrighty, and I think that's going to bring us to the end. We've got one more question here as well. So I'm just going to jump us out of these slides and stop that share to bring you back up nice and large. There we go. All right, so we had an anonymous question come through. As a support coordinator, do I need to get written permission to access support coordination from my participants' core support budget?
No. In that, you do, if the person's funding is NDIA managed, obviously you're now changing your schedule of supports, and you should go back to them and change that across. Written can be a little tricky at the moment with signatures and things like that. So, you might want to check out electronic signing. You might want to make sure you've got some process in place around, verbal consent, etc. Again, it's all about communication. But if you are looking for working with somebody who's plan managed or self-managed, then again, that comes down to the individual and the organisation they might be plan managing with.
Fantastic. And our final question for everyone, we are conscious of your time.
I think you've had 3 final questions, Mel.
I've had 3 final questions, but I
think there's something dodgy happening here. This is your final, because I'm going to need to refill my coffee.
That's all good. All right. So I count to 3 times. So here's my third and final one for you.
All right.
Can I switch the way my funding is managed? So if I'm agency, self, or plan, can I switch between them right now? And how do I do that?
Okay, so the simple answer is, and that is actually a very good final question and a great question to end on, is yes, you can. Certainly, it's, if you're needing more flexibility and your plan is currently agency managed, or you're working with a participant whose plan is currently agency managed, then phoning the NDIA and getting that swapped across to plan or self-managed makes a lot of sense. there's a lot more freedom and flexibility in what you do and in the choice of providers that you can choose as well. So yes,
Fantastic.
you sure can.
Lovely. All right. Now, I promised that was my last question, so we'll leave it there. Elisa, thank you so, so much. We really appreciate you taking the time out of what I'm sure is a busy afternoon to have a chat with myself and with everyone who's either joining us live here today or watching the replay. Thank you once again. It's been absolutely amazing. And we love having you here, and we hope to have you here again in a fortnight's time, fingers crossed.
Yeah, let's hope there's not too many more massive changes from the agency between now and then. Let's try and have a couple of weeks where things are a little bit smooth sailing. That would be great. But yes, thank you to everybody and for your time and your attention today. We don't take that lightly. We know that everybody is very busy, and hopefully we can distill some of this info down shortly into this hour for you and make it a whole lot easier to keep abreast of what's happening. So thanks for your time.
Lovely. And for anyone, if you do want to contact the team at Plan Tracker, Elisa, myself, and our friendly team are available on phone, 1800 549 670. You can reach us on email, hello@plantracker.com.au, or find us on Facebook. Just search for Plan Tracker. And we hope to speak with you all very soon. Until then, have a lovely afternoon.